All right, let's jump into the first topic of the week. We wanted to talk about, of course, OpenAI's new O1 model, which, by the way, I'm loving these naming conventions, 4001. I don't know how anyone's supposed to follow what the hell this stuff means, but it is actually a pretty meaningful and profound new version of OpenAI's models and research. In their own announcement, they said, in our test, this next model performs similarly to PhD students on challenging benchmark tasks in physics, chemistry, and biology. It excels in math and coding. Look, the main innovation here is when you ask ChatGPT, GPT-4o in particular, and the models before it, when you ask it a question, it takes roughly the same amount of time to answer any question, which people have used as an example of, or a signal that it's not really reasoning, it's not really thinking, it's just kind of spitting out tokens. This new model will first figure out a chain of thought, a chain of reasoning, and really break down your prompt into a series of questions, a process, and it will crunch through that process, consolidate the answer, and then produce something much, much more high quality, typically, than what's called a one-shot prompt. And so this is having a profound impact on the result. And I think I just saw an IQ test where all the models are over on one side and O1 is over on the right. It's actually a big leap forward in terms of, if not the real reasoning, the perceived reasoning of this AI stuff, this generative AI stuff. What's your hot take? Is this a meaningful step forward, or is it a kind of glorified, clever prompting where it just sort of asks itself a chain of thought and then asks itself some more questions?
I don't know what's happening behind the hood, really, but I really love the fact that, first of all, I'm a geek, so I like the name O1. I'm sure a lot of people don't like it, but I like it. Second of all, I like the fact that there's like the thinking, and Ryan Hoover, founder of Product Hunt, said that like thinking is the new loading. And I totally agree with that because you see the thinking, and I don't know if you've noticed, you can click on the thinking and you can see the process.
Yes.
As an engineer, I love that. This is like so delightful to see that process. I think they should expand that by default. And then the result was pretty okay. Like it knew how many R's are in BlackBerry, which is great, which I expected the previous model to know. But I don't think that it significantly was better in the simple tasks that I tasked it with. It has a one big shortcoming, which is it does not support images. So it's not integrated currently with DALL-E. So I couldn't port my old conversations into the new model if it had images, which was one of the downsides of this beta product.
I don't like the name. It reminds me of Xbox doing the 360 and then the one, and it's like, what are we doing over here? Let's just be chronological in some way. I think this is relatively significant because I think chain of thought, at least from my perspective, I'm talking to, very early stage startups that are working in this space, both from a like an infrastructure middleware standpoint and also from an application layer standpoint. And so many of them are trying to build kind of like agentic tech that can have enough reasoning capabilities to plan something and then take action and then evaluate the results of that. And chain of thought is a critical kind of piece of that. And so I think just having that level of reasoning capability down at the bottom layer, at the foundational layer, unlocks a lot of things for a lot of people, particularly developers who might actually add even more value to users. But it also is kind of a thing where I get curious. There was a time maybe a year ago where it felt like open source was kind of like truly competitive with the closed side of the ecosystem. That seems to have fallen off as big corporations have kind of like bear hugged their capabilities and stopped letting their PhDs publish and other things. This feels a little bit like the biggest kind of leap forward from the closed side of the ecosystem thus far. And so it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, I think Llama is going to match that within a month. I'll be very surprised if the open source does not match that. But I agree with you. Like this is a big step from the closed side of the business. I just don't see any reason for Facebook's open source LLM not to release something very similar.
I love this thing where you can open it up and you can see how it's planning and how it's thinking. I'm such a nerd for that, and it's really cool. There's a few things that strike me about this. The first is there's been a lot of startups, especially agentic startups, that have been trying to plug this hole, right? They've added this kind of pseudo reasoning layer over the top where they'll first ask the model to break down a prompt into a series of steps, and then they'll run each step through the model. And they're trying to build this scaffolding to make up for the model's weaknesses. And this is something that we've predicted on this show for many months, that the foundation layers, the models are going to cannibalize the app layer, and they're going to do that over and over and over again. And this is a really big threat to app developers working at the app layer, startups that are operating at the app layer, and it's a real threat to VCs who are investing at the app layer. It is not clear to me where the white space is and how far the platform layer and the frontier models are going to cannibalize up into the app stack. So it's a very risky place to be living and breathing and investing and developing, I think. It's also clear to me that this is a good signal of OpenAI is racing ahead of the competitors, right? Like the open source model catches up and like, oh, look, ours has reasoning. And Llama 3 will have reasoning. It's like, oh, look, ours has long-lived sessions. And so, they have to keep racing. They have to keep racing uphill. It's a paranoia and hustle are definitely, I can't imagine being an OpenAI right now. It's a real hustle to stay ahead. What this says to me is, yes, the criticism of a 4.0 is, well, it's not really reasoning, as every prompt takes the same amount of time. It's like, okay, well, now it's reasoning. Well, it's not really an agent because it doesn't do long-lived, tasks. Well, the next thing they'll do is like, here's a long-lived task. Well, it's not really an agent because it doesn't do actions. Well, I assure you, OpenAI will start doing actions. And so I think anyone who says, hey, these models aren't going to really go do this other thing, I think is going to be sorely mistaken over the course of the next 12 or 24 months.
I think Sam Altman put it in a very simple way. He said, you can bet that AI will continue to suck, or you can bet that we're going to do our job and make it unsuck.
Mm.
And you can build tools that will make it unsuck for now, but then will cannibalize you. He didn't say that, but that was the undercurrent statement. So I think that at least me as an investor, making a bet that it won't suck, that it will have deep reasoning, long sessions, consistency, will actually come with the right answer 10 out of 10 times. That's my bet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's cannibalizing just as much to the kind of infrastructure middleware layer, if not more so, than to the application layer. I mean, obviously, ChatGPT is the super killer app right now, right? Like it is
Mm-hmm.
the one with hundreds of millions of users, the one with the most recognition, and all of these things. I think there's an argument to be made that there have been applications in the past that weren't particularly defensible, but by the network effect that they drew and the data they were able to pull in, which gave them some sort of moat around their ability to perfect their algorithms or perfect their outputs or what have you. OpenAI is not going to slice off for all of these niche, highly verticalized, particularly in consumer, because I think there's more money in the enterprise to be going after those things. I think there's a world in which your personalized data and or the personalized data of all whatever dog owners or things that are specifically verticalized and niche have a chance. I think anybody that is trying to do the UI of AI only is screwed, because I think that should disappear for the most part. Like that shouldn't be a thing we are spending that much time on. The thing we're probably going to be spending more time on is making judgment calls and decisions based on data and evaluations and analysis we can trust. And that AI can then go and perform those tasks or perform and execute against the decisions that we make.
So there's actually three things you said that are really interesting
Wow.
that I have a
Look
counter.
at me go.
I disagree with you on all three. So let's talk about that.
Oh, great.
So you said it's the most popular. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the most popular AI by volume, by usage, is actually Meta. I may be wrong about that, but I was talking to a friend of mine who happens to run one of the main AI surfaces at Meta. WhatsApp and Messenger have massive AI volumes of queries and prompts from those surfaces. So, these existing tech products have a massive distribution advantage. And while we are not in there, asking WhatsApp AI questions, lots of mainstream people are doing that. So that's just an interesting data point. The other, as you mentioned, if you're doing the UI for AI, that's a big mistake. Well, Satya just came out and said, all these models are going to be commoditized, and think of Copilot as the UI for AI. And he's firmly positioned, Microsoft's whole Copilot strategy as the UI for AI. And then The third bit of data you just said is like maybe a chat GPT as one of the popular ones, get in there and get personal data and get personal insights, or one of these startups. There's a chance to differentiate. But we've talked on this show many times about the idea that no one has more personal data and personal access, like in your pocket and in your home, than Google and Apple. And so they can afford to be light years behind. And when they're ready, your Google Home, your Google Pixel, your Apple AirPods, your Apple phone is going to be your, if not your God model, your God interface to a God model of their choosing, or collection of models that make it basically Samantha from her. And I think that's an unfair advantage that, again, calls into question the startup opportunity in my mind, and the OpenAI opportunity.
I did not realize that that many people were actually using Facebook's AI stuff. I see it
Mm.
advertised all the time, but maybe I live in a bubble where we were all using ChatGPT and never cared to ask WhatsApp anything,
Yeah.
which is fine. I'm not particularly surprised because I think right now AI is like that thing that's like the new toy, the new thing in town that people I bet want to like try out and they don't really even know what they're doing, a little bit of blank cursor, whatever. All good. Microsoft is very different in my mind than what I was talking about with regard to like the UI of AI. I think there are many startups out there that have tried and failed to do chat your data, that have tried to do learning and hiring and recruiting because LLMs are so tailored to the qualitative kind of language based, blah, 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 blah,
Mhm.
right? And like, I think that's very like UI of AI. I think you could, if you're
Mm.
smart enough to use a raw model to kind of like go and do that kind of analysis for you, you could. It's not that difficult. And so I think Microsoft putting all of its weight behind saying we are going to UIify and integrate a model with all of this
Everything.
stuff that's important to you. I think that's fine because we're still going to be working on computers. I don't think we're anywhere close to the world in which like we're curring it out here where we're, just like using our voice exclusively and not actually doing work, right? And producing pages of data and charts and graphs and the things that we do. We're just going to be doing it with a buddy.
So first of all, I can see the migration. Like I'm an avid OpenAI user, but if you look at my usage of AI as time passes, I think Google more and more brings the AI into my incumbent interface, Gmail and calendar and everywhere. So if you count as a PM, as a product manager, if you count the amount of interactions that I have with AI, Google is probably winning, not on intent, but on like touch points in my life. So more touch points are going to be, to your point, Chris, with interfaces that are owned by Google, by Apple, because that's the interfaces that I use every day. So I think there is a point where you say, hey, OpenAI will innovate, but at the end of the day, the person who owns the distribution owns the game.
Right.
So that's one thing. I think my way of thinking is not UI, but more of like a gamut between using AI to make my business better by doing some tooling and then creating co-pilots for every role in the enterprise. So I think that we're now in that stage where every startup is trying to create a co-pilot for finance, a co-pilot for HR, a co-pilot for this, a co-pilot for that. And then there's the next stage, which is agents. So basically, again, coming back to Ryan Hoover, I love his article about synthetic humans. He talks about the fact that we're going to have colleagues that are basically AI. And the teams is going to be like a mix of AI people and humans. And I think that is the future. I've made a few bets in that area, creating synthetic humans for different roles.